Now, what would you say that Jesus uniquely shifts that idea of sovereignty when he arrives on the scene and through his mission? Perhaps, one thing that comes to mind is the idea of God's kingdom is near. The good news is God's kingdom, but there is a separate
Right.
kingdom that's outside of this world.
Jesus coming into the world does change things because he has redeemed the world. We haven't seen the full effects of redemption yet because we're still living in between times. We're living between his first coming and his second coming. And the second coming, of course, is something that we await in the future. We don't know when that's going to come. But we recognize that the world is ultimately redeemed through Jesus Christ, and the full fruits of that are still awaiting us as we await God's seventh day when we enter into God's rest at that point and rest from the work that He has given us at in the present age. But we also recognize that even from the beginning, implicit in the very creation, is that the God is the ruler of creation. And what happened in the garden uh, with our first parents in the garden in Genesis chapter 3 is basically their efforts to style themselves as gods. So, what is the first sin? Well, I've sometimes thought, well, is it pride or is it idolatry? But it
Yeah,
turns out that I'm not sure that's a distinction that has a lot of salience because pride. When we become prideful, we are basically uh, making a pretense to godlike supremacy, to
mm,
godlike sovereignty. And in the modern age, this assertion of sovereignty is not really new. The way that it manifested itself in the early modern period, that was new, that was fresh, that was innovative, if you will.
yeah,
But the pretense on the part of human beings to be gods, that's something that has existed from the very beginning. So even in the Old Testament, we see Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonians, who
yeah.
conquered Judah and took its people into captivity. Well, he's basically making a pretense to godlike authority. In Psalm 82, we see God addressing uh, apparently earthly rulers who style themselves as gods, but they are treating the poor, they're treating the vulnerable, they're treating the people unjustly. They're not treating them in the way that they should, precisely because they see themselves as gods, and they're
Yeah.
trying to lord it over the people that they are ruling. So
Yeah.
that's something that it's existed from the very beginning, but it took on a particularly modern shape uh, around 5 centuries ago.
So how would you distinguish the ideology of liberalism between that? Because is the liberalism simply a systemic way of giving that structure in a political sense?
It's one form that this secular ideology, this ideology of sovereignty in the modern age, is one form that it took, and it's continued to develop over the last 4 or 5 centuries.
A key question really it comes down to where do we believe that sovereignty is derived, right?
Right.
And if it's the individual, if it's God, based on that answer, it's going to shift how we contextualize things. And I think in your book, Political Visions and Illusions, you're essentially saying these different ideologies sort of manifest different ways that plays out, right?
Exactly. No, that's right. Yeah. So and if you say that the individual is sovereign, you still have to account for community in some way. And of course, liberals have historically said, well, communities are simply the aggregations of individuals who have come together for their own chosen purposes, and they are within their rights uh, to take back this commission that they've given to their communities and to form other
Mhm.
communities and to do whatever they want. So that's liberalism's way of accounting for it. If we get into democratism, it's the democratic people that are ultimately sovereign.
Yeah.
We find that going back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We find that in very seminal form in Hobbes and Locke as well.
Yeah.
So
But in
if
some ways, the democratism would be a group of individuals that have this shared desire, right?
Yeah,
Individual
exactly.
desire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, and nationalism It's the same way, nation is a kind of conglomeration of individuals. Now, nationalists tend to be much more collectivist than liberals would be, even though
Yeah.
the end result the result might end up in the same place. Socialism is the economic class. It's economic solidarity is something that holds us together. So but somehow the architects of sovereignty in the early modern period had to find some source of authority. And
Yeah.
that source of authority, they could no longer rely on God because God was removed from the picture. The source of authority had to be something within us in some way, something within God's creation.